because everyone keeps telling Lawrence that he should run, and he refuses to. Like, he might be the only character in this whole story. Like, even though Bellini says everyone wants it, Lawrence is probably the only character who actually doesn't want it,
Mm-hmm.
and goes to great lengths not to get it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, willing to bend the rules a little bit.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite guests, Avalon, to review the 2024 political thriller Conclave. The screenplay was by Peter Strahan and directed by Edward Berger, and it was based on Conclave by Robert Harris. So, Avalon, what is your overall initial impressions and rating for the film Conclave?
This is one of those movies that it became more interesting after you started watching it and started getting into it. Like, you had those initial thoughts going into it, like, oh, this is gonna be like a church drama or something, and then you find out it's like there's actually a lot of politics and like religious themes and other things like just going on throughout. And it just drew me in. So I got really interested in it, very quickly into the story. Like within I think a third of the movie, I was fully invested in the story, like what was going on. So, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. And my review was a 7.3.
Wow, okay. That's a very high praise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree that the film was very interesting, especially in regards to, I mean, it's obviously relevant given recent occurrences in the world today, right? The death of Pope Francis and the conclave is going to be happening soon, or depending on when you watch this, is currently happening or had already happened. So, what is the conclave? The conclave is basically the meeting of all of the cardinals after the pope dies to elect the next pope of the Catholic Church. So that is the premise of this film: is the pope dies and the conclave meets to decide who the next pope should be, and all of the intrigue that goes on with that. So, I think initially you might look at that and say, oh, that is incredibly boring. But if you just think of that from a more political standpoint, that maybe people don't have purely religious or moral motives in a religious group to try to get someone to be the leader of their organization, in this case the church, it immediately starts to have more interest to it. And especially because it has that religious aspect, I think it adds a bent to a general political intrigue plot that you don't normally get. So I thought that the premise in and of itself was pretty interesting. I think the end is a little controversial, and I went back and forth a lot in my
I'll
head
agree with that.
about the ending of the film. But overall, I thought it was at least worth a first time watch. And based on the readings I did, the actual process of the conclave is very true to how the conclave actually works, right? So you see them cast the votes, and you see whether or not they succeed or fail, right? If they fail the vote and no one gets a majority, they put the smoke into the burner, and it releases smoke into the air to let everyone know outside that they have not yet chosen or come to a consensus on who the pope should be. So that process of occurrence is true to their normal format and procedure, to the best of my knowledge. Now, obviously, the political intrigue and all that is for the sake of the story. Do we know that the Cardinals are actually as political as we see? I would not be surprised. As a human being, we're dealing with other humans who are flawed and have their own motives and desires just as much as non-Catholics do, right? But at the same time, we can't say that for sure. Obviously, I don't know any Cardinals myself, so take everything with that on a grain of salt. This is purely a enjoyable story for the sake of telling a story, not necessarily anything in it should be taken with this is how the Catholic Church is and blah blah blah. No.
Well, I think there is an aspect of this story where it's like you kind of get this insight into the Catholic Church, where it's like the Pope really is not just the head of the church; he determines the direction and where the church is supposed to stand. The Roman Catholic Church is supposed to stand on certain issues. So in a way, it's kind of like the president of the United States, who we elect determines the direction of the country for the next few years. So obviously, with the Pope, it's much longer than that, but just depending how long they live. But it's just like there is a very much a political factor, and I could definitely see like I would almost expect there to be some kind of political infighting among the Cardinals because it's like that it does matter, like depending where
Right.
they stand. Like I think that's a very realistic take.
Right. And we'll get into that more as the film progresses, because you could very much see how that plays out in certain aspects of the film. We'll get to that in a bit, but first, if you are unfamiliar with Conclave, I might have spoiled it a little bit, but I want to go into a little more detail about the actual plot of the film and what Conclave is about.
Conclave. Now, just to be clear, as a disclaimer from the get-go, this is not about the recent Pope death. I mean, Pope Francis
Right,
just
no.
died. Like, this movie is not based on any real Pope that has died. It's a fictional story in and of itself, not based on real characters. So the process is real. I just wanted to make that disclaimer right now, in case people get the wrong idea. Um, but anyways, this is in conclave, the leading pope of the time dies, and a conclave is essentially announced, and Cardinal Lawrence, who's played by Ralph Fiennes, I'm assuming I got his last name right, he is selected to lead the conclave, and so he oversees all the other cardinals as they come in as they decide to vote on a new pope. And Cardinal Lawrence is very moral in some regards, and he wants to make sure they choose the right pope to succeed the last one. However, as the conclave begins, like secrets come to light. He begins to know things about the other candidates, about the people running for the papacy. That starts to color his view of these individuals and who should be in charge. And it's like you see a lot of conflict in his character and also in the story, and comes down to the movie really focuses on the conclave and like who should run the church and why.
And for the audience's context, the role that Thomas Lawrence had, who is the protagonist, is the Dean of Cardinals. And the Dean of Cardinals and the Vice Dean of Cardinals are considered the second and third in command of the Catholic Church, right underneath the Pope. So that's why he's in charge of carrying out the prayer at the beginning of the conclave and all of that sort of stuff. Just as a little added context for you there. Yeah, they start off with the death of the Pope as this opening scene, right? And you see Thomas Lawrence, who's the main character, Aldo Bellini, Joseph Tremblay, and Joshua Adeyemi, who are all important cardinals in the church and also in the story. Basically, all the important cardinals, except for two, honestly, are in the room at that point, and basically mourning and doing the final rites for the Pope's death. What were your thoughts on that opening scene, introducing us to the characters, all of the stuff that they do at the very beginning of this film?
I thought it was a very interesting way to start the movie because like essentially you start with the Pope having just died that day. Mm-hmm. And already from the get-go there are notes of like intrigue where it's like the dean didn't know, like apparently was like he wanted to know why he wasn't informed earlier. And we get this idea that there was something like there was a lack of communication, and it's unclear if that was intentional or if it was just circumstantial.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like from the get-go we're given doubt as to like did the Pope die naturally or did something happen? And
true.
And to be frank, that question is never fully answered throughout the movie. It just seems like, but the question is still sort of like raised to the audience's minds, like, did he die naturally or not? No one really knows for sure. In fact, you get an idea, like, something's happened in his last day that was important, but we don't know what it is like from the audience perspective. And like so for an opening, it's really well done because it like establishes a death, it establishes what needs to happen, and we already established with some political intrigue where it's like, okay, something is going on here that is trying to remain in the dark.
Yeah, I
So,
think two things stuck out to me about the opening scene. Not to dwell too much on it, but I do think that it was engaging, just like you said. One of them is that death is an inherently compelling aspect. People can't help but look, even at accidents or death or trauma that's occurring. The very start of that is a inherently intriguing thing to watch. And then in addition, it shows us from a storytelling technique, right? It engages us right into the fray of the argument, right? You already have the protagonist thrown into a universe, into a world where they are compelled to take action, right? As the Dean of Cardinals, Thomas Lawrence can't help but
mhm.
carry out the responsibilities of ensuring the conclave occurs. So it's definitely a
Yeah.
great way to thrust the action forward and the momentum forward for the story, and also provide a compelling
Mhm.
hook for the audiences. Um, Shoot, what was the other thing I was going to say? I don't know, but those are. I think it's great. I think for an opening piece. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is that I think that the unique aspect to this opener specifically was the idea of these final rites for the Pope, right? And I do think that anytime you have some sort of ritual involved, some sort of ceremony, there is also a interesting aspect to that. Not required, obviously, but it definitely is something that you go, oh, this is something that they do for a reason. There's symbolic representation and meaning to it. Why do they have? Why is there such significance and meaning to it, and all that stuff, right? Like when they take off the Pope's ring and then they take the seal off of it, right, and use it for I believe they use it for sealing the ribbon around his door to mark
Yeah,
it off.
they're sealing his chambers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's
Mhm.
all these things they do to like close up the official location of the Pope. It's very interesting. So I think that it is inherently well done at catching people's attention using a technique of creativity, right? In the ceremonies and in the things. I mean, I guess I don't know if it's really creative because maybe they do actually do that for the Pope. I don't really know. But I do think that it's at least something engaging for the audience. I've never seen something like that before. And then also using very clear techniques for telling a good story and engaging the audience intention from the start. Uh, yeah, that's all I have to say on the opening scene. It does well at introducing you to Thomas Lawrence, who's clearly grieved as the protagonist at the death of his good friend the Pope, and then introducing us to the other characters, Aldo Bellini, a little bit of Joseph Tremblay, but not a lot at the beginning. A little bit of Joshua Adeyemi, who's the Catholic Pope from, I believe it's from Africa, from Ethiopia, I believe, but I don't remember exactly which country he's from. Um,
Yeah.
so, anyways, what were your thoughts on the introduction to Thomas Lawrence? Did you think he was a compelling character? Yes, no, why? Would love to hear your thoughts.
I really liked Lawrence as a character because at first he is simply this moral character. He seems to care deeply about. Well, you actually do know he cares deeply about the church and about teaching and other and about the truth. And you see that in that he doesn't actually want the position he's in. He doesn't want to be the dean anymore. In fact, he already tried when it's revealed that he tried to resign already, and the Pope refused him before his death. If it's an insight into his character, where he's like, he wants to be with the people. He doesn't actually want to be this manager position that he's in, and he's quite willing to throw that position away if it means, if for what he thinks is right or for the truth. And he actually does that several times in the movie, like quite willing to risk his job more or less just to know what happened. So so he's this moral character, but he's also he doubts also. We're shown his doubt of like other people's character, of the situations, and whether what they're doing is right in some cases.
Mm,
Uh, and also, like you see him bending the rules willingly just to get like to find the truth or to get to find what he wants or what he's looking for. And so, like, in some ways, like, he's definitely a flawed character where it's like he's not, like, completely moral. He's willing to do things to, like, in the one scene later on, he exposes Tremblay in a way that clearly isn't the right way of dealing with it, but
Hmm.
he wants the truth out there because he's like, I'm not gonna let this be on my conscience. And so he exposes Tremblay in front of the whole conclave.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, there's so many interesting things. Um, it might be appropriate to get to that, but before we get to that, because I do think each character, side character, should be discussed in their own way, and that will be very much related to um, Thomas Lawrence's development as a character. So I think we'll take each one in
Yeah.
turn. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's appropriate in this situation. But just in regards to the opening, right? You have the Catholic Church, and the very idea of it is this idea that you have people who are above reproach, who hold to the highest purity in regards to their personal lives and how they conduct themselves and all of that. And so there's this idea of the reluctant hero and the person who's humble and pushing away the call to glory or adventure or whatever might be considered worldly in the situation. Um, in this case, there's a sense in which everyone's called to be the protagonist in this in the conclave, right? Everyone's supposed to be humble, rejecting this call, humbly accepting the call that other people thrust upon them to do this thing, right? And so
Yeah.
the question is like who's really being humble, who's really not? Are they truly fulfilling the role of a cardinal here? And it's definitely a strong theme of what does it mean to be pure? What does it mean to be holy and to seek righteousness and justice and to do the right thing in the situation. Um, yeah, it's just interesting that everyone is in that situation here. It's not just the protagonist, and the question is who is truly doing that and who's doing that to the best of their abilities. Um, and I guess in some ways you can make the argument that everyone's called to that, right? Everyone's called to a higher standard than what they actually hold themselves to. But, in the case of the Catholic Church, they would I think, well, you could actually make a very good argument if you're taking a religious standpoint that they are called to a higher standard. But regardless, we're getting way too in the weeds here. Point being, I thought it was interesting that they take a technique that
Yes.
usually it just applies to one character if they use it and applied it to all the characters. So yeah, let's move on to each of the characters really takes a beating in one way or another, right? Because you have Aldo Bellini, Joseph Tremblay, Joshua Adeyemi, and who's the other guy? Shoot,
Talking about
Trebago, Trabajo. Oh gosh, what's his name? The Italian one. Tedesco, Goffredo Tedesco.
oh, Tedesco. Yeah, Tedesco.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Of
each of
course.
those five characters are the primary contenders throughout the film for being the next
Hmm.
pope, aside from Thomas Lawrence, who I guess also starts to become a contender himself as the story progresses. So I
Yeah.
figured
So,
going through each of
and then
these
you also have, and then you
Benitez,
have a few other notable characters as well, like Sister Agnes and Benitez.
right?
Just because, like, because Sister Agnes is clearly watching over this whole proceedings as well, and is involved in the back end, like Lawrence, in several situations. So her
Correct.
role is kind of important.
Hmm.
And then Benitez is the surprise cardinal who shows up at the beginning that no one knows where he came from, and
Yeah,
then has an important role later on.
yeah. So I figured we go through each of them one by one. As each of them
Okay.
takes a fall from grace in their own way. Starting with I think Adeyemi is the first one, right?
Oh, I mean to fall out of the running?
Yes.
I'm trying to remember if Bellini falls out or not. When he falls out. Because at the very beginning of the story, they want,
True.
like, there's almost this group, they think Bellini, because he was the vice dean, that he should be voted in as the
Hmm.
next pope.
Right.
Um,
And
but
Thomas Lawrence
then,
makes it clear from the start, right, that he doesn't want to be the next pope. And so when anyone
yes.
suggests that he is the next pope, he goes, "No, I don't want it. Let's vote someone else in.
Mhm.
Aldo, I choose
Mhm.
you."
I kind of want to start with Bellini, only because he kind of takes a center role in the voting process, even though he doesn't drop out first. Because at first, he almost has the same humble attitude as Lawrence, where it's almost like, I don't actually want this. And then when several people talk to him, he's like, okay, this is where I stand on these issues. If you are going to vote for me, I'm not going to shy away from that. And he almost acts like, okay, fine, I'll do this. And then when the voting starts, and he only gets 18 votes or something, like he doesn't get a majority. And it's almost like he starts to get upset, where it's almost like he actually did want it. He just didn't he was downplaying it. And it's it's one of those interesting character things for him, where it's he cares deeply about the direction of where the church is going. And so he doesn't like some of the other possibilities with some of the other candidates. And he's just and so when he starts to blame Lawrence at that one scene where he's almost like he suspects Lawrence of voting otherwise. But as the audience, he's been voting Bellini every single vote up to that point. So, but it shows insight to Bellini's character, where he's just he actually does kind of want it, admittedly for kind of good reasons. I was I just want to make sure the church is going in the right direction. But still, it's you can't downplay the fact that he's kind of hiding the fact that he's actually does kind of want the position.
Right. And just as a side, the protagonist and antagonist are clearly shown in more of a black and whitish kind of standpoint perspective in this film, right? Where they say this side is good and this side is not. And so you should clearly dislike this person from being voted because they stand for these issues and we stand for these other issues. And that's the right thing to stand for. So, obviously I take this as a film, so take that with a grain of salt. I assume that was simply prose for the sake of the film.
No, I agree. Obviously, this is a fictional story. It's not you can. Obviously, audiences will take from it what they will. And just to be clear, the people watching this, listening to this podcast, they're talking about Tedesco. When Tedesco comes in as the Pope for the running, I forget where is he from? He's from he's from Italy, somewhere. Yeah. He is Italian, but it's just he stands for what the Roman Church used to stand for, a return to old ways, and this does not bode well or jive well with Lawrence or some of the other cardinals, and so they're secretly talking we need to make sure someone else gets in besides Tedesco. So, but Tedesco has a high following. So,
and if you were to take this from a more political standpoint, not that I think you should, and this will be the only part where I think it's relevant to have this in a political standpoint framework, but just for the audience's references, Aldo Bellini is far left from an American political standpoint. Tedesco is very far right in the political standpoint. You have Tremblay, who's sort of a centrist, and you have Thomas Lawrence, who's somewhere between Bellini and Tremblay. So, and then Adeyemi, I think, is also between Lawrence and Bellini. So, there you go. That's how you get this diverse group. And I actually looked this up earlier, but I don't even know why, but I found that out, so, that's super cool. Anyway, that's enough on that. Point being is that Bellini and Thomas in this film are painted in a positive light, and that's the presentation they're given as clearly these are the right virtues to hold. We are not taking a stance in this film either way, because we're talking about the values of the film, not politics, because why? That's not the point of this. Anyways.
I mean, yeah, you're right, where it's even though this is the setting, the politics of the conclave, and all the religious stances of these different candidates, the story is about Lawrence and his struggles as the head of this conclave to try to do what is right. Where it's almost he wants to honor God in how he leads this conclave and also honor the previous pope at the same time. And he also wants to choose the best candidate for the papacy. But while he does preach about, we should have a candidate who doubts, who's flawed, who's not necessarily who isn't a perfect man, because then we know he is someone who can lead us, who understands, and won't lead us in the wrong direction. So, though he says that, he's also still kind of looking for a candidate who's exemplifies what he thinks a pope should be. And so his struggles are really the story that are shown, like, because it's always focusing on him and like what his thoughts are, his doubts, and like we see him every step of the way of this journey. And in a way, we also see him struggling with should he take the papacy, because he doesn't really want it, but there's also like he doesn't want this management role, but people keep suggesting he should take it, and so that's also part of the conflict of his character in the story. So,
yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to touch more on that at the end of the when we get to talk about the ending. But for now, let's move on to something else.
Yeah. So you have Aldo Bellini. I think you're right at the start. He kind of gets shoved to the side, and there's some discussion about him later. But at that point, he is pretty much out of the running. So that's a correction on your part that's accurate. He gets unmasked very early on as this person who his just recapping what Avalon was talking about earlier, right? Because we kind of went off trail for a minute there. He's clearly this guy who actually did have a desire to be the Pope. And he pretty much says that later on when he goes, anyone who becomes a cardinal or joins the Holy Catholic Church doesn't do this without at least a desire to become the Pope one day, right? That this is an ambition that all popes, all cardinals and all members of the church who seek the holy offices have. So, this is don't kid yourself, Thomas Lawrence, that you don't want this yourself, just like I want it, and I'm just mad that I'm not going to get it now because I clearly not getting the votes I ought to have. So, it shows, I think, and maybe some of this is showing the flaws or the sins, quote unquote, of the Catholic Church in various degrees, how different sins can make you fall from grace, right? And in this case, it's the sin of pride or ambition or, vainglorious desire, right? That is taking Aldo Bellini out of the running. And it's almost as if like it's not his specific value as a pope that takes him out. It's the fact that he had wrong desire that takes him out of being the leader of the church. And it's more circuitous with him compared to the other people in the church where it's very clear. But yeah,
he doesn't have the big fall from grace necessarily, not the big like secret reveal like the other candidates do. He's kind of quietly bows out in a way. So like there are all these tense conversations between him and Lawrence, but Bellini more or less, like, once it becomes clear to him that he's no longer, like, a prime candidate for the papacy, he kind of, like, he's upset, but he also acknowledges, like, I am not the one people want to see in the papacy, in this role.
Exactly. So, that's his character, and this is something that, Lawrence struggles with trying to be loyal to his friend while also seeing that and he's a very loyal character from the start, right? He's very loyal to the Pope, who's even dead now, right? He's loyal to his friend Bellini, who he's very close with, and he doesn't have a desire to turn against them, even when Bellini goes, no, vote for someone else at this point because I'm not a candidate who's going to win, and we have to do this for political reasons now instead of for my personal ambition, right? Which, to his credit, right, he ends up taking his own ambition and shoving it to the side for the sake of the church at the end of the day. So he does the right thing, even though he had the wrong ambitions for the sake of the story.
Yeah. Well, Bellini, as I said, like he did want what was best for the church in some ways. In his conversations, he implies that, but he did have personal ambitions. So, I mean, he was, when it came down to the line, he's like, he put his like desire for the church to be okay.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's like it made sense for him to drop his ambitions for the sake of the church because he's already made that clear. Like that's where he stands. Like he cares about the church.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good cap up of Bellini. So unless you have more to say, I think we should move on to Adeyemi.
No, I think we should move on to Adeyemi now. The next candidate, who is the like. He's almost like the popular vote because it almost looks like he's going to win until the confrontation, the situation in the cafeteria, and then Lawrence finds out about the the nun. Was it a nun? Was she a nun at the time? Was she just essentially slept with this woman and she had a son or something? And Adeyemi covered it up or something.
Right.
But somehow she's here, and now this is more or less getting people talking.
Right. She was a nun at this point. It wasn't clear in the film if she was a nun when the affair occurred, but at that point, at this point in the film, she is part of the church. But anyways, continue.
Yeah, no, so Adeyemi is like, he is heartbroken over his sin now. He implies that it was a mistake, and he wishes he could take it back. But Lawrence essentially tells him, like, while his sins are forgiven, you are probably not going to be Pope now because this is going to get around and everyone's going to know what happened. And of course, that happens, and at the next vote, he practically gets 0 votes. And it's like, okay, so we're still looking for a Pope, and Adeyemi is out.
Right. So what's interesting that he says in that conversation with Adeyemi in his room is not necessarily that those rumors are confirmed. He basically says the very existence of those rumors in the conclave means that people will not vote for you out of the mere suspicion that you've done something wrong. And that's what kills his votes. And I think it was interesting just because you could take a whole side tangent on that, on the danger of rumors. In this case, they'd be true, but like they're not always true, and just how destructive they can be because you saw a confrontation between two people that you didn't hear the full extent of, right? So, regardless, it was an interesting idea of like the sins, the sexual sins that can occur, and how those are the downfall, especially in the Catholic Church, especially in this scenario, and how it leads him to also lose his position as a papal candidate in this scenario. I mean, that one's pretty like neatly tied up in a bow. I think. Well, interesting. I mean, go ahead.
Really, what Adeyemi also does is, like, even though like it touches on the idea of how sexual sin can ruin a candidate in the Catholic Church for the conclave, when they're running for the Pope, what the situation also sets up is the situation with Tremblay, because already Tremblay, it was revealed that Tremblay had a private conversation with the Pope on the last day of his life, and he knew about the Pope's death before Bellini and Lawrence did. And it's unclear why he knew and what happened. Furthermore, as Lawrence starts to investigate, because he wonders, why is this nun here? Because this girl who Adeyemi slept with, this woman, like, why is she here at the conclave? Like, this is way far away from her home. Like, she had to be flown in. So he realizes this is not, like, this is suspicious already. And then he discovers Tremblay flew her in. Like, he knew about Adeyemi's indiscretion, and he realized, and he essentially took advantage of that to cause him to fall, so that he could boost his own chances at the papacy. And once Lawrence finds out about this, he's legitimately upset. He's just like, because he sees this, the deception and the power, like the, I'm losing the word right now, but but in a word, he has a tense confrontation with Tremblay. Tremblay, of course, denies it and is acting like all pompous, and he's like, almost like it's assured that he's going to win the papacy at this point, because it almost seems like he is.
Right. Well, as a side tangent, right, the reason they think that Tremblay is going to win is because he is, at this point, one of the two only options people are seriously considering, at least it appears, besides potentially Lawrence, for the papal rule, right, for being the next pope.
Yeah.
And it's either this more centrist / left-leaning leader Tremblay from Canada, or this Italian leader Tedesco, who's a lot more on the far right conservative side, who is very much more for a he literally basically calls for the next crusade, an anti-terrorism, like a very aggressive form of approach to things for the Catholic Church. So
yes,
those are basically the two options people are considering, and people like Bellini, for example, are looking at Tremblay, and they're like, we don't like Tremblay, but Tremblay is a far better option for us and for what we stand for than Tedesco, who is so far from our views that we don't want him in office at all, right? So
Yeah.
vote for the lesser of two evils, basically, is what he's advocating for in this case. So that's why it appears that Tremblay is going to win. So go ahead, keep going with Tremblay.
So yeah, no, but Tremblay more or less puts Lawrence in this dilemma where it's like, does he, because he sees Bellini's argument
Mm-hmm.
and he understands why, but at the same time he's like, do I let this go unnoticed? Do I say nothing? And so in the end, with the help of Sister Agnes, because they look into records, they have access to files, and they essentially print off the documents and give it to make sure every single cardinal gets them, essentially exposing Tremblay in front of and so Tremblay is disgraced in front of the whole conclave because it's revealed what he did, not only to disgrace Adeyemi,
Mm-hmm.
but how he also paid money to try to buy votes and to
Mm-hmm.
try to gain the papacy.
Mm-hmm.
And once it's clear what his character is, he loses everyone's respect, and he is essentially out of the running. So, but it also puts everyone in a situation where it's like now it's just Tedesco and Lawrence, pretty much. I mean, there's other candidates still running, but everyone's only really considering Tedesco and Lawrence now. And Lawrence, of course, doesn't want the papacy.
Right, exactly.
He's made that clear multiple times throughout the movie. But and I think at this point we're kind of going through the movie, the story.
Sure. Before we get too much further, I think it's important to note that this situation with Tremblay points out some really interesting conflicts within Lawrence as a character that we had already seen blowing up a little bit earlier in the film. So early on in the film, you have this assistant to Lawrence who's feeding him information about what's going on in the outside world. Now, what's important about the conclave is the conclave is supposed to be isolated, right? All of the cardinals do not get information from the outside world. They don't have any influences from people outside of the papacy about what's going on in the world because they're supposed to be solely dedicating themselves to making this decision. Now, this assistant going out and getting information for Thomas Lawrence is kind of a violation of that, but there's some like excusability to it early on because there's this idea that he's the dean of the cardinals, right? And he is helping to facilitate this and trying to make sure that while these proceedings go on, they go on in a safe manner, right? And there's concerns about terrorism acts going on outside and other such issues. And so he just needs to be informed so that everyone is safe inside of the St. Peter's Basilica during these proceedings, things like that, right? It's excusable, if you will.
Yeah.
When you get to the situation with Tedesco, he makes some very clear violations. The first of which is that he takes information, he goes on to the internet and does some research using, what is the nun's name again? Agnes, Sister Agnes?
Sister Agnes, yeah.
Yeah, so he goes onto Sister Agnes's computer and does some research, which is clearly a violation of getting information from the outside world, right? So then he takes that information and spreads it out to prove that Tremblay is doing something wrong. He also breaks into the Pope's room, which is at the very least questionable. I don't know for sure if that's a violation, but it seems pretty drastic for someone to do. And then thirdly, he blacks out some of the people's names in the records that he found that shows that not only did Tremblay do these other things, but he also paid off several of the cardinals to vote for him in the initial proceedings during the vote in the conclave. So,
yes.
All of that goes to show, like, why do some people get leniency while others do not? Why is Thomas Lawrence picking favorites in the situation? All of these things make him more of a questionable character, and like, is he truly someone who's seeking what's right in the situation? And I mean, it leads to even broader questions that Lawrence is struggling throughout the film of what is right to do versus what is he called to do, right? In his role as a cardinal, does he follow the letter of the law, or does he follow what he believes in his heart to be right in this situation? You know, and his decision is that he should expose the truth and pursue truth for the betterment of the church, than more so than he should support the ideas of the letter of the law for the cardinals during the proceedings at the conclave. So it's a pretty interesting struggle that he has within himself, and then for the papacy at large as he goes through the situation. Um, yeah, I think that that's just important to know. That's a big part of who he is as a character during this section of the film.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because as much as these characters each represent like themes about lying and cheating and infidelity and ambition and all these other themes that are being developed, they're very clear cut, right? It's very clear to say, okay, this is the theme or the idea they're trying to represent, and this is what comes out
Yeah.
from it. So
Mhm.
it's not very nuanced in that way, I guess.
No, I appreciated the how they used the themes with these individual characters.
Hmm.
I thought it made the movie more interesting
Oh, for
because it
sure.
added more, and in a way, it did kind of give each character their own depth in some ways too. Where it's like they weren't just cardboard cutouts; they had their own ideas of what should happen, and so like they kind of had that. You got this picture of each character and what they stood for.
Yeah.
Um. So yeah. To continue with the story, before we continue on to any more characters, I feel like we should talk about an aspect of the story and the conflict that does play a role in it, and that is they are sequestered from the rest of the world. Like they're cut off the conclave. But there's also this like hidden ticking clock, more or less, where Lawrence more or less admits that the longer they wait to elect a pope, the more they look divided as a church. The more they make the Roman Catholic Church look weak and like there's more internal problems than there should be.
Hmm.
And he has that hanging over him throughout the story. Even though he wants to choose the correct pope, he also has this ticking clock going, and we all know. And there's rumors through his assistant say there's unrest outside. There's issues like possibly in the streets. So more or less, we're given this idea that there's danger brewing if they don't make a decision soon, which leads to the whole scene where they have the vote, and then there's the explosion through the window and with debris raining down. Some terrorist attack on a car bomb like outside, which just tells the rest of the Cardinals like we're running out of time. We need to make a decision and move on.
Yeah.
So it like, but it definitely like it brings the story to a point where it's like Lawrence and the Pope's Cardinals need to make a decision. They can't keep like they keep coming back uh, to this voting, and they keep like not getting a majority and keep choosing like getting split on decisions.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, uh, and also more or less the attack kind of fuels Tedesco, where it's like, see, this is why I need to be in charge because we need to fight against this kind of terrorism. We need to fight against these other religions. We need to like showcase the power of the Roman Catholic Church, is what he argues.
Hmm.
But in the midst of all this, because like Lawrence up until now is the prime opposing candidate. You know, he
Hmm.
hasn't made any argument for himself, and he doesn't want it. Consistently, he doesn't want it. You know, people say he should take it. Uh, but throughout this whole time, we've had Benitez, who's been this like side character who's been consistently getting like a few votes here and there. But apparently, he voted for Lawrence. Um, but he stands up in the middle of all this, and he almost appears like this, almost like Christ-like figure, where he's like, "We need to like sin is not in like is like sin is found in the hearts of men. It's not found like in the actions or in other like." He makes this really strong argument for like against Tedesco, um, as to why Tedesco is not completely right in his argument in
Hmm.
front of the rest of the Cardinals.
Right.
And more or less, that argument leads to the ending of the story, which is like, with surprise, surprise, Benitez gets voted in as the next pope.
Right.
So, which is always supposed to be like the shocker, like, oh, upstart overturn. Now, I will say from a storytelling perspective, when they Benitez was introduced, it was interesting, and then at every single time they vote, they announce how many votes each cardinal got. They kept mentioning Benitez, how many votes he got. So from a storyteller perspective, I was watching this and I was just like, Benitez is going to win the vote in the end because
Hmm.
he's
Hmm.
staying in there, he's kind of staying low, and it's just like from a storyteller perspective, for me, I was just like, I wasn't surprised by the ending. I was just like, okay, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
So
Yes, and I do agree. The revelation was supposed to be surprising. It got some points from me in that regard because it wasn't inherently clear, but as a storyteller myself, in the middle of writing my own novel, it's like, okay, I saw this coming 100 miles away. I knew this was gonna happen,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So it wasn't
Yeah.
incredibly surprising, and in regards to even
Mm.
when they revealed it, I think they could have done that better, right? And the key thing was that when
Mm.
they're reading off the votes and they say this person got hardly any, this person got hardly any, this person got hardly any, right? They were showing each candidate who was in their running, right? These very significant figures. And
Yeah.
they show Thomas Lawrence first, who was the prime candidate against Tedesco, when they really should have shown him last. And the reason for that is
Yeah.
like if you really want us to think, oh, maybe Lawrence won after all, you want to show him last instead of showing him at the very beginning. Because once you see that, you're like, okay, he didn't get it. We know Tedesco's not going to get it because if they did, what kind of story would this be? And we already know Tremblay, Bellini, and Adeyemi aren't getting it. So anyways, all that to say is like they could have had a little better payoff at the end with that, but I'm picking out hairs here. That's just a little personal tangent. It's like, come on, you could have done that aesthetically a little bit better, and it would have been zero effort. But whatever. I'm not. Anyways, that's all aside. Yes, I agree. It was not that surprising to me personally.
Hmm.
And it's also because every time you see Benitez presented in the story, he is presented as a very Christ-like character, right? He's always with a
Yeah.
strong air of humility. He's always saying, I never asked anyone to vote for me. He's always saying these things that are trying to represent what the Catholic Church says they represent, which is Christ. And when he goes on this speech at the end, countering Tedesco, this Italian man who's very far right, advocating for these anti-war rhetoric, or this pro-war rhetoric, excuse me, he goes into this idea of like, what would Christ do? Christ was not out there attacking people. He was out there loving the people and pursuing peace and unity in the world. So,
Yeah.
a strong counter to the ideas that Tedesco is trying to present, bringing them back to the original roots of the Catholic Church. Obviously, he stands for what the Catholic Church says they stand for, more than anyone else who is in the papacy contending for the next pope in this story.
I mean, I guess we could talk about how, because there are, like, Benitez is a character who interacts with Lawrence throughout the movie, and we see he does bring out a side of Lawrence's character, which is worth noting, where it's like, because I mean, we keep saying how he's like, if there's a side where he's like clearly doesn't want the papacy, it's very clearly spelled out when he talks with Benitez, because Benitez almost fully supports Lawrence, keeps voting for him, even though Lawrence doesn't want him to, and tells him to vote for someone else. And he is like actually getting upset and angry in his conversations with Benitez. He's like, I don't want you to vote for me. I want to leave this role. I want to go back to like a role teaching in a smaller church. I don't want this. He's like getting visibly upset. He doesn't like with Benitez over this, which just is interesting to note because it's like because everyone keeps telling Lawrence that he should run, and he refuses to. Like he might be the only character in this whole story. Like even though Bellini says everyone wants it, Lawrence is probably the only character who actually doesn't want it and goes to great lengths not to get it. In fact, willing to bend the rules a little bit just in case, and is willing to step down in those moments. Like I am willing to step down over this, like let someone else take over. But of course, everyone refuses to let him do that.
You're right.
So, and I think this just plays into the big reveal at the end, because I think as far as the themes and story, it plays out in the reveal that we find out after the voting is done. Most of the cardinals who are on Lawrence's side are like celebrating. I was like, oh, we've got a good candidate, and Lawrence is even as happy until his servant, not servant, we haven't even actually mentioned his name, have we? The guy who is helping him, his helper, the guy.
I don't even remember. Yeah, it's probably not good for me, but yeah.
Was it O'Malley or I don't know. I'm looking at the cast list.
I do know he's British, right? Lawrence is supposed to be a British character in this story, and they have each of the primary cardinals who are contending to be the pope to be from different countries, right? Italy,
Yeah.
Britain, America,
Hmm.
uh, why am I blanking? Uh, Canada, Ethiopia, and Mexico. So, they're all from different countries, and they not that that represents the other countries, but they distinguish them very clearly in each of these different ways. So,
But he comes with new information because it's hinted at the very beginning of the movie that Benitez was a surprise like cardinal. No one knew of his existence because the former pope had hidden him. No one knew why. But then his Lawrence's
well, supposedly he was in a area of conflict, right? And so that was the excuse
yes,
why he was not revealed, and it would put his life in
yes,
danger if everyone knew about him. But turns out there was more to
yes.
that. Go ahead.
So, but then his O'Malley, whoever, like he looks into it, and after the voting is done, he kind of comes to Lawrence's shame. He's like, I should have told you this before the voting because I found out more information about Benitez.
Hmm.
And then he shows him, and which leads to the confrontation between Lawrence and Benitez in the private Pope's chambers, where
Hmm.
they have a private conversation, more or less, because Benitez has a medical condition that, if had been known, would have probably made him ineligible for the papacy to begin with.
Hmm. And
So,
his condition was that he's intersexual, that he was born with a
yeah,
uterus. And
yes,
the idea that he comes to is that I was born this way, and that at the end of the day, I decided if God made me this way, that I should not change it. So when the Pope brought me to this clinic, or flew me out to this clinic to have this operation to remove it, I decided against it and did not go. That's the big reveal
mm-hmm.
at the end of the story. And he chooses this name
Yeah,
every time a pope becomes the next pope. They get to choose their name as the pope. He chooses the name Pope Innocent and goes on to become the next pope of the Catholic Church. Clearly a
yes,
statement. It's not exactly pro homosexuality, but it strongly hints, at the very least, toward a pro homosexual stance. And that's kind of how the story ends.
So, I mean, I would also argue that part of the reveal is also to play into the other conflict of Lawrence's character, because
Hmm.
the movie kind of through this makes the point that Lawrence should have run, that
Hmm.
everyone was telling him to run and he was refusing to, and even at the end, you kind of see his regret where he realizes I should have run, I should have been willing to take on the role, but he wasn't willing to because he is adamant in refusing the role,
Hmm.
like he doesn't want it.
Hmm.
And it's not necessarily for, like, if you think about it, it's actually not necessarily for righteous reasons that he doesn't want the role. He
Hmm.
just doesn't want the responsibility of being in a management role as the dean anymore. He doesn't want to be in this management role, even though the former pope thought he should be.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, in a way, like, he's just looking forward to the conclave being over so that he can go on to a different role in his life.
Hmm. Right.
So, in a way, this up like, and he's also like he's looking for the perfect candidate to like take on the role of papacy. It's almost like a shock to him when he realizes he failed in that. He didn't find the right role person to fulfill the role in the papacy. He found like this person is just as human as everyone else. In fact, he has his own like secrets that probably would have disqualified him as Tremblay or Adeyemi.
Hmm.
And I think that hits him hard after the fact, and he doesn't know, like, you see him like wandering about, like he doesn't know like how to handle this, how to take it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that that's true. I didn't actually take that away from the viewing of the film. I think that that's a really interesting point to take away from it, because it closes pretty
Yeah,
quickly after that revelation. But that interpretation definitely
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. So no, I don't, and I do think your interpretation is like at least partly correct.
Hmm.
I just think in the context of the grander story, that because it's so focused on Lawrence, that this is the actual story they're trying to tell, like regarding Lawrence, where he's like sometimes like uh just like showing his struggle and how in the end he chose, like he may have chosen wrong.
Hmm.
But that's I mean, take that as you will. I mean,
Clearly, this film was taking certain stances by the end. I think that Avalon's stance and perspective is valuable, especially for someone like myself that even didn't even think about that. And regardless, what you see is the rest of the church continues to move on, right? It ends with nuns chattering as they walk out of the St. Peter's Basilica. So it's basically like, oh, the world is going back to normal now that they have figured this out and reestablished the papacy in the world today. And that's how the film
Yeah.
ends. And that's what you get. That
Mm-hmm.
is Conclave. So what do you think? Do you think this film is
Yep.
going to last the test of time? Would you change your rating? What are your overall thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, I might. I mean, I might lower it. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I give it higher.
Sure.
7.3 is what I started at. I might lower it to 7.1 or 7. But even then, I mean, it's not a perfect movie,
Sure.
but I did enjoy it, a good section of it, and I did appreciate some things they did in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
As far as standing the test of time, who knows? Though I do think, I mean, not to make light of the current situation with Pope Francis,
Sure.
I do think, like, this, part of the reason we were reviewing this movie is because a lot of people started referencing this movie in relation to Pope Francis's death.
Sure.
And some people have made the comments that maybe this will be like the new thing where it's like people start watching this movie when a pope dies or something. But,
sure. Well, I mean, it definitely came up in Amazon's recommended as soon as this was going on. So it's definitely a topic that people are intrigued by, interested in, and so it's a very relevant time to have this discussion about, how politics affects the church, right? How people will let their own feelings and emotions get in the way of doing what they think is right, right? And how you can't escape that even in a religious setting.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Personally, I gave it a 5.
Well, you changed your review.
I know. I don't think I said it earlier in the podcast. I gave it a 5.1. But with your comments, I think you did convince me at least a little bit to raise it to a 5.5. Like I said before, I thoroughly enjoyed the first watch. I think it's an intriguing film. Very clear themes. I don't know that it's as nuanced as some of the other films I've watched, which I appreciate a ton. I mean, I like Christopher Nolan for a reason. I think he very much develops nuances to themes and struggles with them. I think this film does it well, but it has some very black and white perspectives on things that makes it a little less nuanced in the ways that I personally appreciate films. And they could have done better at raising the tension in certain circumstances. Overall, though, not a bad film, worth the watch, and that's all I have to say. I don't think it's going to stand the test of time per se, but people will definitely be watching it in critical times like now, right? And that's what you get.
Yep.
That's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back, as we always are, next week. We'll see you all then.